Go in one, two, three. Yes, we're going. All right. So thanks again for joining me today. And just for a round of introductions, I suppose, could you tell me a little bit about what is your current role or job title and what does that mean?
Sure. So I am a technical advisor at the EdTech Center at World Education. So my work is focused primarily on supporting educators and educational systems to integrate technology in meaningful and strategic ways. So really supporting the development of strategies around EdTech. Within that, I lead one strategic initiative and support another one. One of the strategic initiatives that I lead is called the AI for Learning and Work Initiative. And within that, I build partnerships for our organization, develop resources for the field, and do webinars, publications, and all of that kind of capacity strengthening type of work. I also support and was initially hired to support our open education initiative called Crowd Learning. And within that, we do similar activities, but with the focus of expanding access to and the use of open educational resources. So I'm really excited about the conversations that are happening, I feel like, in the open education community around generative AI and what's next for that movement and philosophy. And then equally, I'm interested in the conversations amongst technologists and educators around what it would mean for AI to be open and what are the ethical implications of open AI and that sort of thing. So I love that I can kind of sit at the intersection of the two topics and see how they're playing out.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting space of all the things that are happening at the moment. I
Mm-hmm.
suppose to ground the conversation so we're on the same page, what does AI mean to you? What would you describe as artificial intelligence?
Um, well, I think it's evolved so much over time. So going, all the way back in history to automatons and things like that. I think what AI means to me, honestly, is more of a question and a concept than something truly very tangible. Um, so the question being, can machines think and act like humans? That being kind of the core question. And the more tangible aspects being in the application of AI and in probably the more discrete methods and systems that are in that category of AI. So machine learning and neural networks and generative AI now kind of gives it more tangibility because those are the things that we see in the world.
Hmm. So the core aspect, I suppose, is something that is like human intelligence. It's when machines really seem smart.
Yes, when they seem smart, yeah. And over the
Uh-huh.
years, it's evolved. We used to think machines were really smart for doing, winning chess games. Now we think they're really smart for having natural conversations. So I anticipate that will continue to evolve, and our definition of machines being smart will continue to change.
Hmm. I see. Okay. And then on the other hand, you mentioned that you're involved with open education in a number of different ways. So talking about it in a broad sense, what does
Mhm.
open mean to you in that context in terms of open education?
Sure. Open, I think I'll start with, again, something really tangible, which is open educational resources. And I think there we can define open as freely available and adaptable, is how I think about it. So something that others can adopt and adapt and customize for their purposes. Open education more broadly as this philosophy or approach to education I think of as a continuous kind of cycle where education is happening through the influx of student input on materials and lessons, and then teacher adaptation and iteration, um, and then community sharing and building on each other's work. So that's how I think of it. I know there's many definitions, but I won't repeat what other people have already said very well.
All right. So that is nice in that, like you mentioned, this is a tangible definition that we can really scope out. Um, so in open educational resources, that's clear. Um, does that encompass all of what open is, or is there more to it?
Um, no, I don't think open educational resources is all of what open is. I mean, there are many other applications of open data, open science, open culture, open knowledge, lots of different uses of that term. Um, and I think, I mean, do you want to know my honest thoughts on the term open?
Sure, sure.
Because I think that it's somewhat sometimes problematic, or even I'll say amorphous, so not like sufficiently tangible for people to know what it means. I think in some cases it really just means openly sharing things, and in some ways, so you'll recall when we were in Canada, a lot of the focus was on Indigenous peoples, and yesterday here in the US it was Indigenous Peoples Day. So I think about data sovereignty and ownership over traditional knowledge and ways of thinking, and the things that maybe we don't want to be open or adaptable. Um, and so I think that the term open is an interesting one, and I find that even within a community of experts who are advocates for open education and open sharing and all of that, there's maybe still even a bit of like a tension because of that term. So it's like what do we mean by open? I think is still a question that persists.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. And that's like, I suppose, one of the main reasons why I wanted to preface our discussion about open AI with like, okay, what might open mean and what does AI mean?
Right.
Okay. So between different open initiatives, you mentioned open science, open data, open educational resources, is the commonality between all of them that these are things that are publicly available and that people can adopt and adapt? Or is that the common thing between all of them?
I think so. I mean, I think that sums it up. I'm trying to really think. Yes, there are probably more caveats to that. But in general, I think that's the idea, right? That knowledge is publicly available to everyone. And it's also, I think, presented and shared in a way that people can make meaning from it in their contexts. That's how I really view it. So open data, for example, right? It's publicly available and hopefully also shared in a way that makes it meaningful to a community that would be leveraging open data. Um, so yes, I think in short, yes, I agree with that.
Mm, yeah, that's interesting. I suppose, like for one concrete example, an openly shared resource might be open to one community, but not another if they don't speak the same language as the resource is written in. And
Right.
that wouldn't be open then in that context because people might not be able to meaningfully adopt it.
Yes, I think of it too as like in our work with teachers, right? Let's say that I share a video on YouTube that's open. Um, I don't meet a lot of teachers that can meaningfully take that video and make it suit their own purposes. So they could remix it, yes, but so there's just kind of always that thing about not just sharing, but how you share is really meaningful and open. So sharing publicly, widely, yes, but also giving that thought to how people, where are people going to access it? How are they going to leverage it? How can they save it? How can they, like I said, make meaning of it or adapt it in some way? So in your example, if it's shared in a certain language, what can I do to get it into my own language and then adapt it from there? Can I actually highlight that text and copy and paste it? Those kinds of things, so not just let's share everything, but let's share it in a way that's meaningful to the community or the end users of it.
Hmm. Interesting. And that really makes a definition of openness contingent on the end users. It's something that creators can think about and try to promote for as many as possible, but a thing isn't open by itself, but it's by whether a particular end user can have it as open in their context. Hmm. Okay. So putting that together, I think this is quite an interesting combination now. Um, AI as intelligent machines that we regard as intelligent for the time being, at least, and openness in terms of being able to meaningfully use and perhaps reuse or adapt something. What would open AI in the context of AI in education be?
Yeah, I struggle with the reality of open AI, and I'll tell you why. Because in my work, a lot of our work is focused on adult literacy learners and or around the world marginalized learners who are largely um, disconnected. And so one thing I think about a lot, like we do a lot of work in digital literacy, so supporting learners just in using basic applications on their smartphone or learning how to type in a word processor. So the reality that I know from my work is that there are a lot of people who are not connected to the internet, just to put it very simply. And I struggle because I think about, like, in open education, we have this open like teaching, right? Where like students are helping to form lessons and their voice is incorporated into what we're teaching and stuff like that. When I think about open AI, I think, okay, how is that going to work? So how can we have the people that we know, their voices, their cultures, their identities are missing from the data sets. We know that. That's well established, right? And there's still a significant gap between them and the use of AI insofar as it's like, internet-based chat GPT kind of stuff. Um, So I just see that as really significant. I don't know that we'll be able to, at scale, diversify data sets sufficiently to eventually develop this thing that is like open AI, in being representative of marginalized learners. And I think like open to me is a kind of a social movement. It's hopefully toward equity and better representation. And so I don't know, I do struggle with how feasibly it's going to happen in the AI realm, given where we are right now and where things are going. And things are not going toward making, I don't think they're going at scale toward making things more representative and robust and diversified. So I don't know. I guess I don't even know if I answered your question, but it's a concept that I struggle with in my work, to see where those pieces come together of traditionally marginalized communities and this idea of an AI for equity and good. I hope it happens. That's what I'm working toward personally. But yeah, yeah. Sorry, I don't even remember the question. I'm sorry. I don't think I
No,
answered it.
that's all really relevant and interesting because one of the sub questions here would be what characteristics or concepts or aspects do you associate with OpenAI, and all of that is relevant.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. It's about representation, especially of minoritized groups that are not included by default.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I think too, if we think about like where this started for education and like textbooks, right? It was like getting everybody the information and knowledge that they need to participate. Equity in education. So, I think, okay, well, yeah, how will that work? It actually won't be enough in this case to make AI like free and adaptable. Maybe it could, because there's a lot of work on like offline large language models. I don't know. I guess I struggle to see. I see a path for these, smaller data sets and smaller systems that could work really well. But I struggle to see a path because of like the large language models and what's needed there, and already the imbalance there. Struggle to see how that's going to really like work at scale for everyone. So yeah,
Mhm.
I don't know.
So I suppose there's then, if we're talking about AI as products, as tools, then
Yeah,
there are some aspects in which they can be open. If they're publicly and widely available, that's open in one aspect, but not in others. If they're free, that's another aspect. And if they're
yeah.
adaptable, that's another aspect. But for something to really be open, then it would have to be open across all aspects for everyone? Or,
What? Maybe not. I don't know. Um, I guess it depends on what we mean too. Like what really down the road, what do we see open AI becoming? Um, is it for, researchers? Is it data sets and algorithms that researchers can use to develop things? Is it, like um again, bring it back to what's the tangible aspect. In education, we have this tangible aspect of open educational resources and student voice and those things that the actual practitioners can conceptualize and integrate into their practice. And so I guess the question for me is, what is the tangible thing that we're talking about when we say open AI? Who is the target audience of that or those tangible assets? And then um, again, how can it be shared widely, and how is it shared meaningfully?
mhm. Yeah. And here, something I'd be interested in is, do you see it as a sort of spectrum where something can be more open or less open, or is it binary that it's open or not?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a spectrum, and that's a good way to think about it, because then we can be more comfortable with the complexities.
Mhm.
So yes, agreed.
All right. And actually thinking about the future now that you mentioned it, about how it might go forward, thinking specifically about something that would you might call open AI. I suppose now as open as possible. How do you perceive the role of such open AI in enhancing education in the future?
Well, I don't want to bring up more problems that we have, but uh, I I think this kind of brings me back to my critique of of the term open. Um, because what I'm worried about, again, it kind of goes back to those traditional knowledge tags that can be put on materials and the attributions and things like that. I love open. I love sharing. I don't think we always need credit for what we're sharing. Um, but I have this sense of concern too about that aspect of it, in the ways that I'm seeing it used right now. So I think that's something that we'll need to figure out, and we can figure it out. But where do I see it? Okay, so where do I see OpenAI going? I think the future of OpenAI is largely dependent on developing AI literacy amongst communities and individuals, helping existing communities and systems learn what AI can do in their context and toward their goals, and then also building AI literacy of individuals so that they also know how AI can work in their context and toward their goals. So I kind of have a vision of, students someday having access to open AI and being able to develop their own academic advisor that's going to support them throughout their journey from bachelor's to PhD or something like that. That would be awesome, right? If OpenAI gets us to that point where learners have this free and open access to tools that help them reach their goals. Um, and again, I think that's going to be so dependent on open AI happening in the right way and being realized in a way that is meaningful. And then also individuals having AI literacy. And I think that's part of the open AI conversation as well. Open AI literacy, open resources for AI literacy, open conversations about AI literacy. Because I think if we go down the path of open AI, insofar as it relates to education, but we miss this piece of developing our collective and individual AI literacy, we actually end up at a place where open AI may not be the tool that's helping expand access to education and equity in education. So yeah, I think those things have to go hand in hand. A really careful design of OpenAI with attention to traditionally marginalized learning communities, with attention to really thoughtful human-centered design, with attention to lots of collaboration and open conversations and coming up with shared norms, and then pair that with expanded access to developing digital and AI literacy. Then when we get to that kind of pinnacle of realizing our open AI dreams, everyone's included and we all arrive at that point together and can move forward really constructively in that way. So
Hmm.
that's my vision.
Yeah, and that speaks about both the potential benefits about people being able to personalize it for their own needs, but also the risks that might come with it if it doesn't
Yeah,
go right. All
yeah.
right. I'm aware of the time. We're actually at our initially allotted half an hour. Um,
Oh, okay.
how is your availability? Would you still be free for another 5 minutes, or do you have to go?
No, I'm good right now. So
Okay. Then there are a few questions I wanted to dig into a little bit more. Like, for
sure.
example, when you mentioned collective AI literacy and individual AI literacy, what kind of things are AI literacies that people need?
One thing I see a lot is that teams need to know and collaborate around how AI works for them and what norms they want in place and guidelines they want in place regarding AI. So, kind of that ethical piece as well. So, when I talk about collective AI literacy, I mean our ability as groups of people to use AI to collaborate and build on one another's work. Another reason I think collective AI literacy is so important is because I posted on LinkedIn about this recently. I don't know if you're following me on LinkedIn, but it was actually in response to something Ethan Mollick posted, saying that all of these professors are developing chatbots for their textbooks, or like developing textbooks using generative AI. I thought, okay, that's great, but that's also could lead to a lot of AI waste. And when we think about sustainability and the environmental impact of AI, that's another area where I think it's so important for us to work together in teams using generative AI really sustainably and efficiently, so that we're not each in our silo producing a lot of AI waste. So that's very specific to generative AI, but I think it's really important. So when I talk about collective AI literacy, it's pieces of those. What does your team or your community need from AI, right? Aligning it with your goals. What does your team or your community want to agree on about the ethical and equitable use of AI? And then how can your team or community work together to reduce AI waste and make sure that you're using AI really efficiently? So when I think about that collective aspect, that's what it means to me. And then the individual piece is more, I think, very closely related to digital or media literacy, where as an individual in a world that may be increasingly AI driven, what do I know about what AI can do? Its ability to perceive me, my environment, my children's voices in the home, and what decisions can I make as an aware and informed and autonomous user of AI to make sure that I'm still in ownership of my data, my likeness, my creations, and then even that efficacy piece, right? Like, how can I use AI really effectively to help me? Like one person I've met uses generative AI to come up with recipes for her daughter who has a lot of allergies. And so that's really important for mothers. There's a lot of great uses of AI now on an individual basis, thanks to generative AI, that will really help us all, I think, meet our children's needs, meet our own needs in academia or employment, help us access financial services and health services. So there's a lot of those that I want to see that each individual knows how these tools, which are widely available and mostly free, can support them in meeting their goals and having better health and education outcomes.
Mm, interesting. And I'm wondering now, as I'm picturing the image that you shared of the library with light in between people, um,
Yeah,
I suppose I see a community there. But
yeah.
what do you see in this image? Why did this come to mind with OpenAI?
I think, one reason is because I've been thinking about libraries a lot. I make that analogy a lot when I'm talking about large language models, how they're kind of like libraries, tons of words in them, and now we just find them really easily. So, and, we also do a lot of work in libraries. So I think libraries are amazing. They're like, to me, the maybe pinnacle of open education and openness. And they're embedded in communities and provide so many different services. So I think that to me was a good visual. Like, if I want open AI to happen, I want it to happen in places like libraries, where it's embedded in a community. It meets the needs of that community, and it provides everything freely and publicly. So, that to me was like a really good setting to make this analogy of OpenAI. And then, I think about those little sparks, right? I think about how I want OpenAI to connect us as a community, still give us these nodes of individualization and individual expression, and reach outside of the walls of something like a library or a school or a bank, and reach people who are, maybe not there, not focused on it, but are still in need of maybe some of the benefits of it. So that's kind of the explanation of the picture, I guess, is like community-based open AI that reaches outside of institutions and organizations, but connects us all and helps us work together more effectively and collaboratively.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And then I suppose we talked about the benefits and risks. I'm also interested about the challenges. And so the kinds of things that might be the difficulties we'll face, or maybe difficulties you foresee in the future in implementing OpenAI in education.
Yeah, I think the challenges can be learned through the challenges that maybe have already been faced in open education, for example. Um, a lot of open education happens at a university level, at a very like high university level. That's where we research it, but that's also like where it has a lot of growth and impact, I think. So our initiative, Crowded Learning, has focused on adult literacy and specifically figuring out what open education looks like in that resource constrained educational setting. So, I think that will be one of the challenges moving forward. Open education is led very much already by academia, and a certain demographic. I would say AI is equally led in that same way, maybe more technological, but similar demographic. And so, how will open AI break loose of those biases, break loose of that homogeneous composition of who's moving it forward? Do you know what I mean?
Mm. Hmm.
Homogeneous, not homogeneous. Homogeneous.
Yeah, so this really speaks to definition of open we talked about including different communities. And I suppose when it's led by one community, then it works for that community, but not necessarily for others.
Yeah, and I just think, there's so much benefit too. Just like there's, within education, education is a tool for improved health outcomes, for better economic opportunity. And so when I think about education being open, I really want it to be open for the people who have the most need in those areas. So when I think about AI and open AI, I want it to be open and for the people in the communities that maybe need it the most, and then not just available to them, but like led by them. And I had a great conversation with that keynote speaker at OE Global. He talked, I won't be able to remember his name, but he talked about his connections to the land and his work promoting STEM with the children that he teaches, and things like that. And I remember kind of asking him, like, what does AI have any use here? Like, what do you think about AI? And we talked about, offline AI and the fact that AI can be used without an internet connection. And so what needs could it meet without having to kind of impose internet connection on everyone in the community? And so I think like about those leaders within certain groups, cultures, communities driving what open AI, what they would need from open AI for it to really be meaningful. Going back again to just like not sharing it's not just sharing everything to me, it's sharing things in a meaningful way that actually drives us toward equity. So yeah, sorry, my answers are very
Hmm.
long, and it's my fault that we're over time, so I
It's
apologize.
it's really interesting, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you. I mean, like this part of the conversation really brings us to what steps are important for promoting openness. And
Mhm.
I can see how you're saying it's like getting people to take the lead on AI initiatives in ways that work for them in their context.
Yeah. And I think again, like tangible, like what's really tangible for people, that it's the theory to practice thing. Like, I think that's so important. Talking about open AI is really making it tangible, and open in general. Like, what, I think the reason that OER are such like a recognizable and memorable piece of open education is because to educators, that is the most tangible aspect of the work, right?
I see. Mhm. I'm thinking now, this is going a little bit off script,
Oh,
but
good.
I'm interviewing a number of people together with my team for this study as we get different views on openness. Is there anything you'd like me to ask the other participants?
Hmm. I think one thing I'd be interested to know from more people is why open? Because that to me drives how open. So for me, the why open, I think, is probably clear from my answers, right? Open because it expands access and equity. And if that's the why, that's why I have so many concerns about the how. So I would want to know from them, why open education? Why open AI? Then we can know what the how should be. If we know why we've become motivated to perpetuate this philosophy in our fields, if we know why, then the how becomes clearer. That's like our objective, and then we can work out the details as we move along.
Makes sense. All right. Cool. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. I guess we can wrap up here. Or is there anything else you'd like to add or discuss about the use and future of OpenAI that we haven't covered?
I don't think so. I hope I've sufficiently answered your questions. I think I may have been a little too philosophical, and maybe you wanted something more
Don't worry, there's no such
concrete,
thing as too
but
philosophical when debating what something means.
okay.
Yeah, it's great.
um, yeah, great. Well, I'm excited for you guys. I think like one of the most important things anyone can invest their time in right now is research, understanding in a structured way what all of this should look like, what we mean when we're using these terms. So I thank you guys for doing that work, and I'm excited to see what you come up with. I'm sure it'll really be insightful and propel things forward. So congratulations.
Thanks. All right. I'll stop the recording here
Okay.
and